No one wakes up one day and is like, you know what, I think I want to be addicted to heroin. That just sounds fun. Like, I don't cry over my dad a lot, y'all, but I'm about to lose it. Welcome back to the Grief and Gratitude podcast hosted by me, Raquel McLeod. As always, this will be a safe space for conversations about adoption and kinship care that I've cultivated organically through years of lived experience, education, and community. I hope that you leave here feeling seen and encouraged, but even more important, better equipped to move forward. I think that was it. One take. I'm not doing it again. We're not striving for perfection, right? I tell my kids all the time that... What do I tell my kids all the time? I tell my kids all the time that progress... Nope, that's not how it starts. Oh my gosh. Here we go. I tell my kids all the time that practice equals progress, not perfection. We're going for progress. And so that's what we're doing today. I don't know about y'all, but I grew up, Grandma would be cooking in the kitchen and I would just hop up and sit on the countertop. And so I like sitting on the kitchen table or the countertops. I'm going to try podcasting from here. I know I've switched every single podcast so far, but until I find the perfect fit for me, that's what I'll do. But I'm liking this one the best so far. You can see my beautiful wildflower wall that brings me so much joy, and my wildflowers in a vase, those are real, and my vintage cameras that I've collected. This is a poem that my husband got me for my birthday, signed by one of my favorite poets. And there, I love that you can see this in the episode. This is a photo of my 3 girls. We had the absolute privilege of having our very first family vacation together. We all met in Florida, and an incredibly sweet photographer that had followed my page for a while volunteered her services and did this really awesome photo shoot for our family. And so I love that you can see that in the background. So this may be our new meeting space, y'all. I think I'm digging it. Y'all, I'm pumped. I'm excited to continue to have these conversations. I'm so grateful that you're here and that you're eager to lean in and listen. The feedback I've been getting has been phenomenal, and it truly helps me, not just to like validate me, but in a way like to validate that I am spending my time wisely. I'm using it in a way that is helping others, which is ultimately, I don't care what anyone says. I don't subscribe to this whole look out for number one, just do what makes you happy. Like, I don't feel like that is our purpose on this earth. I feel like we are meant to live in community and we are meant to help others. We're wired to want to do good and to want to help others. And so when we subscribe to this mindset of me, I think it can regress our progress in getting better. And so I hadn't planned on saying that. In fact, none of this episode was scripted. The only thing that I have is back here, and I should have wrote my notes on my hand, because what I wanted to talk to you about today is something very near and dear to my heart. And so I made bullet points of the topics that I wanted to cover specifically within this headline. And the headline is, how do we destigmatize birth mothers? Obviously, that's not a one-man job. That's something that is going to take a lot of people, a lot of time. You know, we don't destigmatize any population overnight. It takes a lot of intentional effort. I think birth mothers are one of those populations that have had so much negative attached to them that it's gonna take a while to swim out from and under those titles that we've had placed on us. And so I want to talk about 5 of the major stigmas that I hear mostly about birth mothers, biological mothers, first mothers, whatever terminology you like to use. Those 5 stigmas are this: 1, that we're unsafe and untrustworthy. 2, we're young and immature. 3, promiscuous. 4, addicted. And 5, unloving. I want to talk about those 5 stereotypes, and I want to talk about how they're sometimes true, but not always true, and most often not true. And this is coming from someone who has a biological mother that checks most of the boxes, if not all of them. Think of any group of people that are fighting to be seen as equals. When you're hell-bent on misunderstanding a population, you will find the worst of that population and attach their character traits to the entire population. And that's unfair. This is something that happens today. This is something we still see in our culture, whether it's a prejudice against someone based on their ethnicity, their skin tone, their orientation, their officers. I've known some really crooked cops, and I've also known some really incredible cops. But if you want to hate a population, you point out the worst ones and you assign those characteristics to the entire population, and then you got yourself a good argument about why they all suck. I grew up with my biological father, and I just call him Dad. I grew up calling him Dad until the last I'd say the last year of his life. I started calling him by his first name, and honestly, just to be transparent, I did it because he had hurt me so much. I just felt like I needed to do that because I knew it hurt him, and that was really ugly of me. That was me trying to make him hurt the same way that he had hurt me. So I started calling him by his first name, but I never refer to him as biological dad in just regular conversation or birth dad or anything. Like I just called him Dad, even though he was consistently inconsistent in my life. He was a part of my life, and that's what I grew up calling him. But he built a reputation real quick whenever they moved to Tennessee, and this was before I was ever born. He had a very unique first name, so it was kind of like Raquel. Like most people that I've met, I'm the only Raquel they know, and kind of the same with his name. Like if you heard his name, you immediately thought of him, and it wasn't a good reputation. And so the town that we grew up in, like even to say my last name, which was my maiden last name, was unique. I have a distinct memory of being at the skating rink. I got dropped off every Friday night. That's where the kids hung out. And I just cut up with people. I've always been a people person and outgoing. And there was an officer that always patrolled the skating rink, and I was just cutting up with him one night talking, and he was like, "What's your name?" And I told him, and he was like, "What's your last name?" And I told him, and immediately his demeanor changed, and he was like, "Do you know?" And he said my father's name, and I was like, "Yeah, that's my dad." Conversation changed. He's like, "Stay out of trouble." And that was the end of our conversation. That stuck with me. I remembered that. And so I grew up not learning to love officers because I saw a lot of the unfair treatment that he received, and a lot of it was warranted, but not all of it. But as an adult, I have made friends with officers. I know that a lot of them are really great people, and some of them aren't, and we take the bad characteristics and we try to define the entire population by it. And that bothers me because I know what that's like as a birth mother. And so I want to talk about these biases. I want to talk about why they're not accurate for this entire population of women that have either chosen adoption or been forced into adoption. Also recognize that all of these things are also true of some birth mothers, but that should not be enough to define our entire population. And so, let's get into it. The number one thing on my list is, and I'm going to have some really cool graphics on my Substack. It'll come out Thursday, and you'll be able to download them to share or save them for future reference. If you subscribe as a paid subscriber to my Substack, you will have access to these resources for an infinite amount of time. If you want to sign up as a free subscriber to my Substack, you have access to them for a week and then they disappear. But the number one thing on my list, we are unsafe and untrustworthy. Some of us are, but not all of us, not most of us. And I lived a long time, especially pre-reunion with my birth daughter, believing that her family probably thought that I was unsafe and untrustworthy and not worthy of a relationship because I was unsafe and untrustworthy, and who wants to take their child around someone that's unsafe and untrustworthy? We're taught to protect our children, not lead them into danger. And so when we finally reunified, my oldest was 9 years old, and I walked on eggshells for the next 9 years, just terrified that I would come across as untrustworthy or unsafe. And not because I was doing any type of untrustworthy or unsafe things. Anything that we talked about, I really wanted to protect my character, and so I always felt guarded because I was afraid of saying something that might be relayed to her parents or something that they would hear me say and it be enough for them to, end our relationship. And that's nothing that they ever said to me. They never put those thoughts into my head. It was my own concern. And I think they, just from the outside looking in, they were older, they were more stable, more mature, more proper than I was, and then I walk in to this relationship still feeling young, still feeling I guess just really not enough, just feeling like I wasn't enough to live up to the standards that they would want to uphold. And again, that's nothing that they ever said to me. That was my own insecurities and concerns, because I grew up hearing and learning that birth mothers were unsafe, that adoptive families kept adoptees from birth parents because it was unsafe. They were untrustworthy. There was a reason that they weren't raising that child, and they needed to be separated from them. And even knowing that I was in a healthy place, that I was making good decisions, that I was checking all the boxes of being a stable and functioning member of society, I still felt like at any moment I could say something that just wouldn't be enough. And one funny story that sticks out in my head, and I wouldn't even know if they would remember this, but we were on a visit. We went to an aquarium, I think, or something like that. And my youngest she just 100 miles a minute, always talking. And she babbled something about how I liked to drink and drive. I always carry a water bottle with me everywhere I go. I now have my nifty new Mama Bear mug that I love, and I always have water on me, and that's what she meant, that I am always drinking my water. Immediately, my face probably, if I could have seen myself, I imagine that my face, all the color drained from it. I was terrified. And in my head, so I explained this. I'm like, no, and so I explained the whole water bottle thing, that I always have a cup of water on me, and that's what she meant by it. But then in my head, I'm thinking, she's gonna leave this visit thinking that I drink and drive and that I'm unsafe and I'm never gonna get to see my oldest again. And this is not a unique experience to me. I think a lot of birth mothers feel this way. In fact, I know they do, because I've had multiple conversations with birth moms that have explained that they always feel like they're walking on eggshells, and they're always concerned that if they say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, that the adoptive parents will find them unfit and stop the relationship. So on the flip side of that, I know that some birth mothers are unsafe and unhealthy. I know, because my own was. Just like I explained, I always called my biological father just dad. I just grew up calling my biological mother just my biological mother. I've not seen her since I was 2. I honestly, at this point, still don't have an interest in seeing her. I think because my journey to becoming a birth mother was painted as a choice, even though looking back, I now know that I wasn't given a choice. I was given an ultimatum. It was still a premeditated or a planned decision, whereas my biological mother, it was a taking and now that I'm like playing this out, it all sounds the same. I guess the difference is the difference that I saw is my biological mother wasn't willing to get better for me and didn't have an interest in being part of my life. And after pregnancy, I worked on getting better and becoming someone worth knowing. And I know that sounds harsh, but if I'd continued to live the lifestyle that I was living pre-pregnancy, I wouldn't have been someone worth knowing. And that's just the truth of it. I think, again, the culture that we're in, we want to sugarcoat everything. But the truth of the matter is I wouldn't have been worth knowing. And so I don't call my biological mother birth mom. I just call her biological mother. And she was unsafe. She was untrustworthy, as was my biological father. But again, he stayed consistently inconsistent in my life, not consistently absent. And so sometimes biological birth, whatever word you want to attach to it, mothers are unsafe and unhealthy, but not always. And it's not fair to group our entire demographic on the ones who are. I think that's all that I can say about that. The second thing on my list is young and immature. And honestly, that is a bias that I held myself for a very long time. I've never been given straightforward, trustworthy facts about anything. I think my biological mother was 18 when she had me. I don't know that to be 100% true, but I think. I was 14 when I got pregnant with my first. In my mind, the only parents that were not raising their children were the ones that were unsafe, unfit, unhealthy. And even a lot of them were doing it poorly. I saw it all throughout my family. And then the other ones were the young ones, the ones that were too young and too immature to take care of their children. And so I had no idea until I started advocating, quite literally, until I started advocating for birth mothers and had women reaching out to me that had made adoption plans in their 20s and 30s. And I think there may have been a couple in their 40s. But that it spanned so many different age groups. I was completely unaware that there were older women making adoption plans. And so I'm not too proud to admit that I don't know it all. Grandma always said, when you're old enough to live, you're old enough to die. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. Like, we should be continually learning, continually renewing our minds, continually open to new information. And the fact is, not all birth mothers were young, immature teens. And I think if you have that mindset, a lot of it kind of influences the way that you view women that have placed children for adoption. It's a lot of the times there's so many different situations that have been shared with me at this point in my life that have made someone feel like adoption was the best option for their child. And I think one of the most what's the word I'm looking for? One of the most underrated tools to give a woman trying to decide if she can parent or if she needs to make an adoption plan is support. And that spans from teenagers on up. It's not just, the 15, 16-year-olds that need, like, at that age you have to have someone willing to house you, unless you want to willingly move into homelessness in order to parent your child. And so that was the ultimatum that I was faced with. It was make an adoption plan or get out. And I felt like the adoption plan was the best choice for my kiddo. And I think we think it's just the teenagers that need someone saying, no, you can do this and I'll support you. I'm not doing it for you, but I'll support you. But it's not just those women. I've had women in their 20s, or they were in their 20s when they made an adoption plan, tell me, like, I just needed someone to tell me that I could do it, that I wasn't going to ruin this kid's life. There's a lot of different factors that have influenced people to say things like that, whether it's age, immaturity, financial status, singleness. A lot of women that I've heard from have been told, like, when they were in their 20s making an adoption plan, it was because they were told that their child needed a mother and a father. They couldn't provide both, and the kid would be better off in a 2-parent home without them. And it's just a lot of things that push us to make the decision to place a child, and very seldom is it out of an immature selfishness. It's not, and I'm not, again, with all of this, I'm not saying this never happens. What I'm saying is it's not the majority. It's not most, it's some. And we've just all been labeled with this majority mindset. And I think there probably are some moms who have said, I'm making an adoption plan because I still want to live my life. But that's not what most of them are thinking. It's, I want this child to have better than what I can provide. And I would say half of the time that mindset comes from the people in our lives saying, you are not capable of providing this child the life it needs. And so it is not, birth mothers are not always young and immature. A lot of times we are. I was young and I was immature. I was 14. But that still didn't make me incapable. What made me incapable was not having a support system. So another one of the top stereotypes that I hear is that birth mothers were just too promiscuous. And that's not the word they use. I have to be a bit more intentional with my wording on social media, but this is going on YouTube and Substack and podcast, and I feel like I can be a bit more candid. So no one tells me you were promiscuous. That's the word. That's the $1,000,000 word that they're hinting at. But I hear things that range from you were a slut and a whore to you should have kept your legs closed to where were your parents? Why does a 14-year-old even know about sex? Okay, that's an unboxing for a completely different podcast. What 14-year-old doesn't know about sex? That's just basic human instinct. Like, we become curious. Our bodies have already changed by 14 years old. Everyone at 14 years old knows what sex is. The problem with this lies in presuming that I was promiscuous and presuming that any person in an unplanned pregnancy that's contemplating an adoption plan or has made an adoption plan, assuming that it was just because they were loose. I get a lot of backlash for not sharing the circumstances of my pregnancy. So anyone who's been around for a while, you have probably picked up on or noticed that I've shared about different things that I've experienced, but I've never shared the circumstances of my pregnancy. If it was consensual or not, if it was someone that I'm still in contact with. I get these questions regularly, and the answer is I'm still not going to tell you today. It's something that I will decide on my time with my birth daughter when I decide if I want to share that part of my story. But that does not negate the fact that most teen pregnancies are a result of, if not direct abuse, like the pregnancy resulting from abuse, a lot of times girls become promiscuous when they've already sustained sexual abuse. And no, it's not abnormal for a 14-year-old to know what sex is. It isn't healthy for 14-year-olds to have sexual partners and to be making decisions that come with adult consequences. And I think people are very quick to just assume that any girl handing it out is, just looking for love, looking for attention, and a lot of times that is true. You're trying to fill a void, but it's so much deeper than that. Instead of just assuming you're loose, you're a slut, you're a whore, there should be conversations about the root of that. There's a reason that 14-year-old girls are having sex, 13-year-old girls, 12-year-old girls, and I know that's so hard to wrap your head around. I'll never forget when my oldest turned 14, which is when I was pregnant with her, and just thinking, oh my gosh, she's a baby, and how was I in that circumstance? How did I think that I was so grown, and how did people look at me and think she's grown enough to be doing these things? It's just because my story, what I have shared is, my season of promiscuity was woven with consensual and non-consensual. I did experience a lot of sexual abuse, and I also consented to a lot of sexual activity, and in none of those instances, looking at children that age now, I'm just like, how? It's so easy to just throw a blanket statement of, oh, she was just a slut. Oh, she was just whoring around. She was this, she was that. But it's so important to remember that not every pregnancy as a result from consensual sex, it is important to remember that young girls, really young girls, having sexual relations typically have some kind of root of abuse. And we need to get to the bottom of that, and we need to have empathy and see the heart behind the child, not just, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're doing this. I can't believe you did that. Like, oh my gosh, what happened? You know, and don't say that to someone. Don't be like, oh my gosh, what happened to you? That's triggering in and of itself, but being able to, in your mind, process the fact that typically these things don't just happen in safe and healthy homes with no prior instances of trauma or abuse, and you don't know the circumstances of a pregnancy unless that person has shared it with you. And so to presume that it was consensual, I've talked to lots of birth mothers who have openly shared that they made an adoption plan, and some chose to parent from a pregnancy that resulted from violent rape. And for some women, that it's really difficult to parent a child and have the memory attached to such a traumatic moment in your life. And so they feel like making an adoption plan is the best for that child to get the love and the support that they need. So, and the other point that I wanted to make, there's a lot of unplanned pregnancies that, like, we have to assume if you're having consensual sex, you know that one of the risks is pregnancy. But it can still be unplanned, unexpected, if you're taking precautions, or maybe you've not been educated well enough in what type of precautions to take. Sometimes the precautions you're taking just fail. I think we also have to recognize that sometimes pregnancies, whether young or older, just it wasn't promiscuity or abuse. It was, this is my boyfriend, I'm in love with him. We're, 15 years old. We think that this is what we need to do to show our love. The precautions failed. Now we're pregnant and don't know what to do. And so there's no way that I could possibly cover every circumstance, even that has been shared with me. And there's so many other different circumstances that I've not heard of, but just from what has shared with me, there's no way to tie that up in one neat box and hit 5 different bullet marks, like, this, and this are the causes of unexpected pregnancies and why, moms make adoption plans. There's just so many, and that's why I say adoption is complex. Adoption is not neat and tidy. It's not black and white. There are so many different shades of gray that encompass the entire experience. And so another common stereotype that I hear is that birth mothers are addicts. And again, some of them are. My biological mother was an addict. She used while she was pregnant with me. After she was pregnant with me, the last I heard, she's still using. And it happens. Before I got pregnant, I was an alcoholic. By 14 years old, I was an alcoholic. And I definitely used and abused drugs. I don't know that I would say that I was addicted to drugs in the same way that I was alcohol, but I used an assortment of different drugs regularly. And when I found out I was pregnant, I stopped cold turkey. And I know that's not easy for everyone. And by the grace of God, for whatever reason, I was able to get a handle on everything very quickly, using just my unborn child as my motivation. But I do know that I'm not the only one that's been able to do that. The airplane. Dadgummit, you can hear everything in this camper. I have had the pleasure of meeting, knowing, being friends with multiple women that have struggled with addiction. Some during pregnancy, before pregnancy, after pregnancy, before placement, after placement, before parenting, while parenting, and they were able to beat the addiction, become and stay clean and sober, build incredible relationships with their children, use their testimony, their story to educate other parents and help others find freedom from addiction. I think if you've never been exposed to that world, it is incredibly scary. And being an addict, being labeled an addict, could be put right up there with being unsafe or unhealthy, right? No one really wants to put their child around someone who is in active addiction because it can be dangerous, it can be unsafe. I feel like it's really easy to hear the word addict having never been exposed to it personally and use that as fuel to avoid someone, right? Like, oh, you heard she was an addict. There are so many incredible people that have beat addiction, which is a disease. If you've not experienced it, it's really hard to understand. And for a lot of us who have experienced it, either personally or from someone we love, it can still be really difficult to extend grace for. I personally watched my dad struggle with addiction his entire life, and he had a good heart. He was a good man, and he started struggling with addiction when he was 13, and he just could not break free of its grip. And to see him struggle and want freedom and not find it was heartbreaking. I don't know anyone who has been an addict or is in active addiction who truly wants, like, no one wakes up one day and is like, you know what, I think I want to be addicted to heroin. That just sounds fun. Like, can you hear that? We're in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, and there is a Titanic Memorial Museum, and the Titanic horn sounds every day at noon. So, but no one wakes up and says, I want to be an addict for the rest of my life, or I want to be an addict for a few years. Like, no, that's no one's aspiration ever. Like, no one wants to be bound to those things. And to see someone that you love struggle so hard and try to get clean and relapse, it's heartbreaking. And when you see it up close and personal like that, and you are able to step back and have a little empathy and realize that it's no longer a choice they're making. It's their brain is so severely hindered that it cannot make a better choice. I'm not sure why some people are able to overcome addiction and others are not. I don't know. I don't have the answers. The class that I'm taking right now at Florida State University on trauma and resilience is covering why some people have resilience and are able to overcome trauma easier than others. And it's all very fascinating. It's something that I've been interested in learning about for a long time. But I guess the fact of the matter, to get back on point, is not all women, and I would say most women that have placed a child for adoption are not addicts or recovered addicts. It's not the norm. It's just something that sometimes happens and is sometimes part of the story, sometimes for a season, sometimes for a long time. But the term birth mother was originally created for women that made adoption plans. It has since been adopted by the foster care community by women who have signed TPRs, lost their parental rights, and some of them identify with the term birth mother now as well. And there's also a different stigma between birth mothers that are making adoption plans in, registered facilities, and birth mothers that have went through the foster care system and lost parental rights due to something. And so when foster care has been involved and a woman has lost parental rights and now identifies as a birth mother, it's known that there was something amiss that caused her to lose parental rights. And I've had birth moms that have lost parental rights through the foster care system share with me openly about their addiction, which is, it seems to be typically the root of foster care adoptions. Some type of neglect, abuse, drug abuse, things of that nature are the factors for the women that I've spoke with. The women that I've spoke with who have created adoption plans through adoption agencies, typically, not always, but typically drugs, addiction, abuse, neglect aren't part of it because they're making an adoption plan while they're pregnant because they feel incapable of filling that role as a parent. And so depending on the demographic that you're speaking to, the source of loss of parental rights is going to be different. And so when I started advocating in this space, I didn't have any connection to foster care because that was never part of my story. My biological mother signed TPR in court with a family lawyer for my grandparents. That same lawyer represented us when we got guardianship and eventually adopted our youngest daughter, who was biologically my half-sister. So our experience in kinship care was outside of the foster care system, but the foster care system, child welfare services, are pushing kinship care as an alternative to traditional foster care non-relative placements. And because of that, now my advocacy is intersecting with the foster care system, and I'm learning as I go because, again, the actual system is not something that I have personal experience with. So I'm learning right alongside a lot of you, and I am sharing that knowledge, and I'm sharing what I know to be true about kinship care that would be applicable outside or inside of the system. But when I first started advocating for birth mothers, I did not even realize or know that women who had lost parental rights through the foster care system were identifying as birth mothers. And it does change some of the facts, like some of the statistics are going to change and be a little different because of that. Because again, whenever, from my experience, moms making adoption plans with an agency have different motivating factors than moms who have been forced to sign TPR through child welfare services. So, but at the end of the day, grouping all of them as addicts is unfair. All birth mothers have not struggled with addiction, and even a lot of the ones that have been able to find freedom and begin healing from that season of their life. So using that as a blanket statement, all birth moms are addicts or alcoholics or, whatever, is an unfair bias. That brings me to my last key point, and probably one that has hurt me more than any others. You can presume I was promiscuous, you can presume I was an addict, you can presume that I was unsafe or unhealthy, you can presume I was young and immature, because I've openly shared I was 14 years old, and yes, that's very young to be carrying a child. But the number one presumption about birth mothers that grieves my heart is that we are unloving. Whether you made an adoption plan with an agency while you were still pregnant, or you lost parental rights due to TPR within the foster care system, none of them have been unloving. Some of them have been so hurt that they've not been able to facilitate or try to facilitate a relationship or a reunion. Some of them have been too scared to reach out because they're terrified of rejection. Some of them have been uninterested in reaching out because they don't want to put that burden on their birth child. They want the child to be able to make that decision. I can give you a handful of reasons why birth mothers have not tried to reconnect or reach out or build a relationship, but none of them have centered around the fact that they didn't love their child. It became very popular within the adoption community for a while to say that adoption is love, and in rebuttal to that, there were a lot of people saying that that is unhealthy. You can't say that adoption is love because these adoptees feel rejected, and to tell them that giving them away was a loving choice is damaging. I refuse to believe that to be true, because I know without a shadow of a doubt that the only thing that allowed me to sign those papers and leave that hospital without my child was love and believing that I was doing the very best thing possible for her. There was nothing else in my heart other than an overwhelming amount of love that allowed me to break my heart in an effort to give her the best life possible. I think it's more damaging to tell adoptees that adoption isn't love, that adoption wasn't a decision made in love. I don't care if you felt like you were being selfish when you made that decision. I don't care if you feel like you were misled. I don't care if you felt like you didn't have another option. The fact that you cared at all, the fact that you wanted what was best for your child, is a loving choice. And I think adoptees need to hear that, yes, it sucks that love had to look like walking away, but it was still love. Truthfully, if you really want to break it down, and I've explained it this way before, I feel like my biological mother leaving was an act of love from her, because she could have stuck around and drugged me through all her chaos, all of her addiction, all of her instability like my father did. He added a lot of extra trauma to my life because he couldn't get healthy, but he wanted me to be a part of it, a part of his chaos. Her walking away was a loving decision. It was the ability. She recognized that she wasn't able to get better, and she walked away. That was her loving me the best way that she could, not being a part of my life. And I respect that. And I'm okay with that. Do I wish things could have been differently? Yes. Who doesn't? I do wish that my birth mother and birth father, my biological parents, could have beat addiction. I wish that they could have been a happy, healthy, loving couple. I wish that they could have created a safe little family for us. But that wasn't how their lives played out, and it was a more loving decision for her to just walk away. And if I think about my own girls, I want to teach them that sometimes love looks like walking away. How many young kids have you known to be in love with a boy that was abusive, and they stayed because why? Because love means staying? It doesn't. Love doesn't always mean that you stay, unfortunately. And it does. It hurts. Sometimes love hurts. But with my girls, if they're in a relationship with someone that they're in love with, I want, and that person becomes abusive, I want them to love themselves enough to walk away. Because the ultimate sacrifice isn't staying in that abusive, unsafe relationship. Love needs to look like leaving in those circumstances. And so we keep trying to put black and white labels on everything. If it's this, it's this. If it's this, it's this. And that's not life. Life is too complex. Adoption is too complex to say a woman who made an adoption plan was not making a loving choice, or adoption isn't love, because you're going to tell me that leaving is love. Yes. Unfortunately, sometimes it is. I will not concede to the ideology that adoption was not a loving choice. It wasn't a choice for me. At the end of the day, it was an ultimatum. And then my choice became, do I parent and face potential homelessness, or do I give her a family that can provide everything I can't? The way that I felt like I could love her best was not by staying and dragging us into a life of instability and homelessness and poverty. The way I felt I could love her best was to make an adoption plan so that she could have two parents that could take care of her and give her stability and safety. I think that there is a lot of conceding. There is a lot of saying, okay, I'm raising the white flag. Whatever you say is true. Truth is relative concept. And just because I believe that adoption can be a loving choice doesn't negate the fact that you were hurt by being placed for adoption, or that you were hurt for having to make an adoption plan, or that you have a biological birth parent that has been unkind or unloving. There are exceptions to everything. But I will not bend and fold what I believe just to be a popular voice within the community. I try to offer gentle truths. I try to be empathetic and compassionate, and I try to acknowledge all sides as someone who has lived all sides and someone who has communicated with a lot of people within the adoption community. I will respect and honor all sides, but I will not water down my truth to be popular. That's that's this episode. That's what I wanted to talk about. I wanted to dive into some super common stereotypes that I've heard throughout the years of the character of a birth mom. I wanted to break those down and explain why they're not always true. I wanted to give you room to acknowledge that sometimes they are true. You know, that's not fun. That's not the easy part of advocating, is acknowledging that sometimes the worst is true. But I think it's super important to realize that it's not always true. It can be true. Just like with every other thing that we talked about. Kind of like spiders can be poisonous, but they're not all poisonous. But people are afraid of spiders because of the ones that are, right? Like, we're not... Okay, no, I'm just scared of all spiders. So that's a bad analogy. I don't care if they're gonna infect me with venom or not. I'm just scared of them. Let's think of something else. Snakes. People are afraid of snakes because some of them are venomous, some of them are deadly. Not all of them, but because some of them are, people are more quick to chop the head off of an innocent little garden snake than to identify it and respect it for what it's good for. But they just assume kill it before it has a chance to speak for itself, right? And so I guess I like analogies, and that one just came to me. I'd never used that before, but that's one way to think of it, you know? It's true of any group that we try to define by the worst characteristics of the group. As a birth mother, I would like to apologize to any of the adoptees here listening that have tried to reach out to their own birth mother and were met with silence, or were really disappointed to find that maybe this woman is still struggling with addiction, or to feel like she was selfish or uncaring. For the adoptees that have reached out to find a birth mother that was unloving or hard to cultivate a relationship with, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that not every story can have the happy ending that you envisioned. I know firsthand that we don't always get the fairy tale ending that we wanted. When my biological father passed away, we were not in a good place. Our relationship had kind of ebbed and flowed over the years, and the last year of his life, we were in a really bad place. And like I shared at the beginning of the video, I'd started calling him by his first name. And at that point in my life, I remember praying, not wanting to pray for him because I was so mad, but just praying, God, let him find freedom. Let him get well. Let us have a good relationship. And I felt good that I was making that sacrifice of prayer. I felt like I was on the right track, like I had finally relented during a really tough season. I was letting the hardness of my heart just start to crumble, and I just knew that he was going to find freedom and we were going to have a restored relationship, and he passed away. And I vividly remember one of the last of the few interactions that we had. He was living with my grandparents that had raised me, and we would go to let him visit our youngest, which was his youngest daughter. And he smoked, and he wasn't allowed to smoke in the house. And he would sit out on the front porch and be smoking a cigarette. And if we pulled up and he was outside smoking, he would stand up and put his arms out to hug me. And I would walk all the way around the first set of steps on the porch to go up the middle set so that I could avoid him altogether and go in the house and sit and silently sulk that I was there for a visit because I was so angry. And one of our last interactions, he asked for a hug and I gave it to him. I don't know, something in my heart, maybe because I had been praying daily for him, something had softened a little bit, and I really feel at this point that was some of God's grace, knowing that I would want some good memories to hang on to. But I embraced him and I gave him a big hug and I told him I loved him, and I hadn't said that in a long time. And I'm so glad that I had that moment, but it was still not the restored relationship. My father wasn't supposed to die at 51 years old. He was supposed to have a lot of years left for us to connect. And I don't cry over my dad a lot, y'all, but I'm about to lose it. He was supposed to get better. We were supposed to have a restored relationship. We were just supposed to make memories. We were supposed to make fun of each other's music and do all these things, because I do have good memories with him despite the bad. He wanted to be a loving, present father, but addiction robbed that from both of us. It robbed him of his full potential. And he was supposed to get better, but he didn't. He passed away. And sometimes I think of that when I think of my biological mother, because people ask me if I want to meet her, if, why I don't want to meet her, and I may do a whole episode on that. But I've thus far made the decision not to reach out, and so I know that we don't all have a good experience with biological or birth family, and some of our biological parents are unsafe. Some of our biological parents were promiscuous and immature and young. Some of our biological parents are addicts. Some of our biological parents seem to be uncaring or self-absorbed, unloving, incapable of prioritizing us in their life. And I'm sorry if that is your experience. I genuinely, from the depth of my heart, understand it. But also, as a birth mother, that is so incredibly grateful that I got the opportunity to reunite with my daughter, knowing that I was safe and I was healthy, knowing that I wasn't an addict. I wasn't any longer too young or too immature knowing that I grew and I loved her with every fiber of my being, and I never didn't love her. I am so grateful that I got the opportunity to reunite and begin to build our relationship, because the truth is, these stereotypes, although they may be true for some birth and biological parents, they are not true for all of us. I just think it's really important that you remember there isn't a person you wouldn't love if you knew their whole story. And that applies to even the ones who do fit those stereotypes. But it is so valuable to not place the worst of the stereotypes on all of us. It just keeps people afraid. Next week, I'm going to wipe my tears away first. I cried. If you are a follower on Instagram, you were given the opportunity to ask questions to birth moms. I have a list of all those. I'm going to print them out, and next week I will candidly answer all of or most of the birth mom questions that you guys had an opportunity to ask. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for leaning in and learning and listening, and I hope you have a good rest of the week.